Tipo Complexo do Salgueiro, Fazenda dos Mineiros, São Gonçalo, Rio de Janeiro.
This little blue line here is where the Google Earth car can drive. We're going here, look.
All this little area that's not in blue, Google Earth doesn't cover that area.
We're on the shore of Guanabara Bay. And here you'll see a pier.
Do you see this concrete pier here?
Guanabara Bay. The bay is the place where the most weapons and drugs enter our country. Rio de Janeiro, former federal capital, was the capital of our country for 200 years.
Federal Deputy Luiz Lima from Rio de Janeiro made an allegation that deeply shook the structure of national defense. According to the data presented, criminal factions are expelling military personnel from their own barracks, imposing absurd restrictions, such as prohibiting them from walking in uniform in certain areas.
I couldn't find any documents, but it says this.
At the military units on Avenida Brazil, the concern about security is real. Following serious incidents, including a Navy officer's death from a stray bullet near Marcílio Dias Naval Hospital, the institution strengthened security protocols for personnel and facilities. Our military personnel cannot walk dressed in uniform on Avenida Brazil in Rio de Janeiro.
This reality exposes the loss of state authority and the vulnerability of the armed forces in the face of the advance of organized crime. The fact that military personnel, who should represent national sovereignty, are forced to hide shows the alarming level of the public security crisis. In addition, the congressman revealed that criminals use an improvised pier to receive weapons and drugs by sea, just a few kilometers from the state government's headquarters and several military units. This geographical proximity between official authority and a parallel power structure is a reflection of the boldness of the factions, which operate practically in plain sight of the authorities. The lack of a firm response demonstrates the fragility of the institutions and the lack of control over the national territory. If this isn't a violation of sovereignty, what else needs to happen for Brazil to wake up? Welcome to Vida no Quartel.
The Navy launched a war-style operation in the area around the Naval Hospital in Rio, where a female officer died after being hit by a stray bullet.
8 armored vehicles are circulating at strategic points. 250 Marines are working to reinforce security.
After the death of Rear Admiral Giselle Mendes, a Navy doctor who was hit by gunfire from traffickers inside the Marcílio Dias Military Hospital, the Brazilian Navy itself acknowledged the danger faced by its members and established specific security protocols. This measure, although necessary, shows that even military areas are in the crosshairs of organized crime, something unthinkable in a country that calls itself sovereign. The Marines, faced with this chaotic scenario, are already discussing in internal forums the possibility of transferring the unit located along Avenida Brazil in Rio to another location. The fear of being shot inside their own barracks has led many military personnel to request a transfer. This situation is a clear sign that the factions are not just challenging the state, but are already forcing it to retreat, making it give up space and territory.
Brazil has the potential to exercise this sovereignty at sea. It has all the necessary elements: a vast area under Brazilian jurisdiction, an indented coastline, and deep water ports capable of accessing global trade. But unfortunately, the maritime mindset is still timid, and in particular, a more mature defense awareness is still lacking. But unfortunately,
you will now see how these groups operate in Brazil and around the world, and which organizations are the most powerful and violent. Criminal gangs manifest themselves in various forms and activities, ranging from traditional types to transnational criminal networks.
What we used to see only in Rio de Janeiro has now become routine in several states across the country, revealing the unchecked expansion of crime. Factions started taking over houses, imposing curfews, and dominating vast areas, creating real enclaves where public authority practically doesn't exist.
Do you want to understand exactly what territorial control is? Take a look at these images from Bahia. In broad daylight, during the funeral of an underage drug dealer from the Red Command, a rival faction attacks the cemetery and sprays the coffin with bullets, causing widespread panic in the city.
This reality gets even worse because many of these regions are home to military organizations, which should symbolize national sovereignty, but end up surrounded and pressured by the advance of crime. What once seemed like a localized problem is now a national portrait of insecurity and institutional fragility, showing that the state has lost control over significant parts of its own territory. If this isn't a violation of national sovereignty, it's hard to imagine what would be. The insistence on claiming that sovereignty can only be violated by external attacks is a fallacy that ignores reality. Brazil is turning into a narco-state, where armed factions dictate the rules and encroach on institutions that should be unshakable.
What ruined Brazilian politics during this period of redemocratization was the greed of politicians. What drives the sinister side of Brazil is greed.
Society has reached its limits. Society's capacity for tolerance is exhausted.
This internal corrosion is just as serious as any foreign threat. The United States has already offered help on several occasions, including recently through the Shield of the Americas program. However, the current Brazilian government remains inert in the face of an outrageous situation that affects not only the civilian population, but also the military themselves. The refusal to accept international cooperation demonstrates a political stance that puts party ideology above the well-being of the Brazilian population. The United States Southern Command has strategic capabilities that could directly support Brazil in combating organized crime. With advanced monitoring technology, combat logistics, and experience in joint operations, the Southern Command would be able to support national forces in critical areas, offering intelligence and operational support to contain the advance of criminal factions. In addition, international intelligence agencies could contribute crucial information about arms and drug trafficking, tracking routes, and identifying global connections of Brazilian criminal factions. Even the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, has already offered Secut, the largest maximum security prison in Latin America, to house dangerous criminals from Brazil. This international cooperation shows that there are viable alternatives, but there is a lack of political will to implement them. Adding to all this, the recent guidance from the Federal Court of Accounts to reduce the power of military commanders in decisions about national defense shows that the military is losing influence in every sense. Whether in the ability to decide on defense or in being expelled from their own barracks by heavily armed criminals, it proves that the military institution in Brazil is being weakened. What we see is a state that failed in the past and continues to fail in the present. The authorities seem not to see the seriousness of the situation, or they see it and simply don't care. The advance of the factions is fast and constant, and government inaction only strengthens the parallel power. With each passing day, Brazil sinks deeper into a scenario of chaos and insecurity. Therefore, if tomorrow we wake up to the news that an armed forces barracks was invaded and taken over by factions, it will not be a surprise, but rather the inevitable consequence of years of neglect and omission.
If the APF wants to bring down the Republic, it will. It doesn't need Focado's plea bargain. The APF has the power to investigate. If the APF were truly autonomous and free to investigate the president or the president of the Chamber of Deputies, it would bring them down. But it doesn't because it's not allowed to. Who appoints the APF's general director? The president. So, are you going to put someone who might turn against you in a position you have a stake in? You won't. Whether it's the APF, ABN, PRF, Penal Police, or the Revenue Service, that's how it works. But the structure is designed not to work. All the strategic positions that run the machine belong to those guys. So, my brother, you don't need Focado's plea bargain. Aren't the Revenue Service, POAF, or the Central Bank aware of these men's financial transactions? Don't they know about their assets and that this behavior is incompatible with the position? If the state was serious, it would task ABIN with state intelligence work, task the federal police with police intelligence work, start the investigation, get the public prosecutor's office, and bust them. It would go after all these politicians.
Here on Vida No Quartel, you stay up to date with everything happening in the military world. Leave a like, subscribe, and watch the videos that are appearing on your screen. Forward fighters, see you next time.